Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Lilian Magallanes. She is a project manager for a large general contractor where she leverages 13 years of construction management and facilities experience to help support technology alignment. In addition to her daytime role, Lilian currently serves as the member committee chair for the Construction Progress Coalition, a nonprofit organization dedicated to defining the future of project data governance through common data exchange. And she's a board member of the NAWIC Los Angeles, celebrating women in the AEC industry. Welcome to the show, Lil.
Thank you, Todd. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So let's start with how you got into the construction industry to begin with.
To be honest, I think it was by mere accident that I decided to join the AEC industry. I think I migrated to the States when I was fairly young. So my mother's sort of biggest dream for me is to be a secretary in a business office one day. And I always felt like, okay, that I need to work in the business world, fine. And finally, when I graduated high school, I went to community college and I took accounting classes because I think secretaries need to know accounting, and I hated it. I walked in day one and I felt like looked around and I was like, why is everyone working off of a ledger or workbook? this is day one, what is happening? And I walked out of the class. I was like, I can't do this. And I think I spent, some time just trying to figure out like, what do I want to do? Like, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do with career? And I decided to, it was actually through a home project, a DIY project, and updating, my kitchen cabinets from a very boring vanilla, color 70s sort of cabinet looking. And I selected this, grass green color that I just loved. And I just fell in love. And I just, I enjoy the process, like planning and just designing and just doing it. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, ooh, maybe I should, go into interior design. And my grandfather is a carpenter by trade. So construction has always been part of my life. But I do remember the very moment I decided, okay, I'm going to change my major into design. Let's see where this goes. And when I graduated in 2007, it was pretty much the beginning of a recession that we're all familiar with.
Right. So it's a fun time to graduate. I'm familiar.
Fun time. And so at the time I was working in facilities for a coffee company called Farmer Brothers Coffee. You see it everywhere at very small diners. So I, continued working there. I was doing facilities and it was a great job. It was really fun. But I still felt like, gosh, I went to school. I should just do what I went to school for. And luckily, I got hired by an architect in Pasadena, California, who gave me a chance, and I got hired as a project assistant. And I did everything and anything I could. I was from organizing the materials library to helping the project architects and architect, on submittals and RFIs, and even with some of the schematic planning. And I did everything I could. Every project that tossed me, I was like, yep. I was just so hungry to learn from everyone. And, of course, the recession got a bit worse. And I felt very blessed that I was able to jump on from the architect on a bond project with public funding. And then there is sort of where I pivot. I thought that, I started doing some FF&E and procurement, tasks. And then I got introduced to the BIM team, and sort of my life changed into construction technology. I just discovered a whole new world. Besides materials and designs. And that's when I realized, wow, this is amazing. Just the fact that we can look at a 3D model and we're trying to get everyone, the stakeholders early in to make decisions. By all means, it wasn't perfect. I think the district had a strong initiative to, put that path forward. And that's where I sort of just, started to scratch the surface with construction tech. So that's how I ended up here.
Yeah.
And then awesome. I got to work for a software company for a number of years, and now I'm back working with a general contractor as my daytime job. But I really, really enjoy, being part of NAWIC, and this year I'm a part of the board. And I think there's nothing more fulfilling for me than being able to give back to this industry, sort of what has given me the opportunity and help other women, feel empowered and knowledgeable and feel that, we have a sisterhood to just, to grow together.
Yeah, that's very
Mhm.
cool. One of the things that I think really just exudes off of you is your passion for the construction industry. And I think that's awesome. I love hearing that.
Yeah, thank you. It's natural. Yeah.
Very cool. So you're on the board with CPC, Construction Progress Coalition.
Yes.
Why do you feel it's so crucial for the industry to focus in on data exchange?
I think being part of the CPC, it was something that, back in the day when I was working for a software company, I worked very closely with Sasha Reed. I feel like everyone in the industry is familiar with her. And she was actually the one that kept talking to me about sort of this pain point, something that Nathan has always mentioned for, quite a number of years. If you know Nathan Wood, at some point in his sentence, he's going to talk about shared pains.
Right.
And so, I've having lived in sort of this silo world, working for a bond project, we were always looking at, data within the model. And we were sort of in this little bubble of just, looking at standards, trying to stand up the BIM standards and the CANT standards and looking at models and what we're getting in there. But then when Sasha introduced me to CPC, it sort of expanded sort of that bubble that I had where, the conversation went from like looking at data in the model to how are we moving that data from different applications? And in my mind, I didn't think there was a barrier, but once I started to get engaged with the CPC group and having deeper conversations with Sasha, that's when I started to learn, wow, we can't move information very fluid from, let's say, from a Revit file over to, let's say we want to use a Bentley system, that's a different file format. In my life that sort of never crossed. I was always staying within one ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need options. We need to be able to have that same file format. Not necessarily, not the same file format, but being able to have sort of open data where you're able to, look at that data and carry that data from the beginning of the project and then moving that over to the end of the project, and even furthermore of how that project information is going to be saved for retrieval of data later on. So that's kind of how I started to really get more informed and just really started to look at how the importance of having open data. And I think that's a lack of a word on my end, but just having data that's readable in other platforms. And we're also just moving more into like a workflow solution in general in this industry. And I feel like we're kind of, we back in the early, 2013, 2010, somewhere around that time, 2010 to 2016, there was sort of like a big eruption of like apps, right? So like PlanGrid to mention one, is one that really made a huge impact in the industry. I remember when I first came across PlanGrid, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I can be on my iPad or my phone and walk around the job site and tag when I need to tag on issues to be done. And then you started to see sort of this, eruption of other apps coming on board. And then now we're sort of kind of coming into like, all right, let's connect everything together. And so we have a lot of apps that are, or I say apps, and because I think of Raken and FieldWire, how can we connect them all together to this bigger workflow, and how can we get this data talking to each other?
Mm-hmm.
I'll pause there because I feel like I'm ranting now.
No, it's good stuff. I think that's been one of the eye-opening experiences for me on having these conversations on the podcast. Is with construction, there's so much data that's being generated through the projects, but none of that data is really being leveraged to its fullest potential. And because there's all these different data silos that exist, and you have to input information into so many different systems, which makes me think, that the buzzword now of common data environment, you hear that all the time. Everybody's trying to claim that they have the single source of truth. They're the common data environment. Why does it really matter? Like, why is that something that people should be striving for? And what does it maybe look like in practice?
Well, it matters. Let's look at it from the field side. It matters because we don't want to ask from the field team to input duplicate data. We know that as a goal in technology, and this is me coming, working, from software for a number of years, is, I feel like the field really isn't think about first. They're always sort of an afterthought, and we're thinking about the office team or the design team. But I think the more easier we can make accessing information, entering data, or even looking at data much more simpler in the field, I feel like that could be, sort of a good, path forward. But the problem is that when we're asking the field to say, hey, we want to make sure we're gathering all the right data. We wanted to talk to each other. We need you to input this data, in this particular, system. Oh, by the way, we also need you to also upload it in this other system down the road when you get to maybe a certain percentage. So we're asking them to duplicate those efforts and kind of put data in different buckets, right? So I think ideally would be great to just, ask for that once, and then that gets to get moved down the road and gets moved into other buckets if needed. But I think when we're putting that stress on the field to duplicate, have multiple duplications, then we start to see the pushback, like, but why? I already did it. And sometimes they may choose not to do it. So that's sort of a challenge, but ideally we're great to just get it done once, have it be sort of this data where it's common, and then it's easy to push forward.
I think that there's two interesting things there. I totally agree with having them do it just once. They don't have the time to sit there and input it 100 different times, nor are they frankly going to. Each progressive time, and they're going to put in less and less. I also think that there's a problem with communication, in that nobody tells the field why they're putting it in there, or like how's it going to benefit the field later on for them putting in their information. Right now, it just frankly kind of seems like a lot of busy work for the field.
Yeah, you bring that's a really good point, because I think, having worked in software for a bit, we're always trying to sell it to that decision maker. This is a great tool because it's going to solve problem 1, 2, 3. But are we really having that are we selling it to the field? Are we, also showing that value to them? But I think this is where, in the communication part, you want to make sure when you're implementing technology in general, we always encounter the change curve, right? The main point of resistance, like new tech, I'm tired, what's happening? But then that curve starts to lessen once that end user starts to see, okay, this is benefiting me because I don't have to do double entry, or it's benefiting me because I'm no longer typing this information. I can now select this from, a generic sort of drop down list. That's great. And so that you start to see that adoption increase. So when you're implementing tech, I always think of 4 things at a very high level. First, you want to make sure that there's a vision from the leadership, like this is where we're going as far as construction technology. This is sort of the direction, and stick to it. Don't change it 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road because another shiny object came your way.
Yeah.
But having sort of that focus. And then second is really just having a pilot team. I feel that when I did consulting for a software company, pilot was something that I realized slowly that it became such a crucial part in having a successful implementation. I could have come there and talked to a number of people and said, okay, what are the pain points? What are we trying to solve? Okay, great. Here is that solution within this application that's going to get you where you want to be. What I've learned from a pilot team is it gives you that direct ability to hear from different people, from different levels of leadership, from folks who are in the field, folks who are in the office, because they're the ones who are going to click and upload and enter data. And oftentimes they have much more insights than that decision team. So that really gave me that sort of grace period in implementing tech to do a course correction. Okay, well, that's not going to work. Let's go ahead and switch things up. And that gives me a much more higher success rate of like, okay, once this gets scaled to the rest of the company, the rest of the project, there's a reason why this is done this way, because your colleague, your, coworker on your field, really resonated with this pain, and this is sort of the end solution. So you start to lessen that curve of that adoption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, it brings up a thought to me that it's really kind of the responsibility of the software company to make sure that they're selling to the office as well as to the field, and really bring in that benefit value to both, and not forgetting the field, as we've already talked about. But I also think then it's incumbent on the company to not expect that the software is going to be the cure-all silver bullet that's going to, fix every single problem that they've ever had, because no software is really going to fix every single problem. No, it could be the best technology in the world, but it's just realistically, it's not going to fix every single problem.
Yeah, I recently read a quote about how we think technology is that silver bullet that you just said, of that's going to fix everything. But sometimes technology, if not done correctly, can harm us even further and set us back. I think, like you mentioned, the software companies, they're responsible to making sure the success of that implementation is done right. The other thing I wanted to add to the pilot that I wanted to mention is having that feedback loop. I think this is a great opportunity where that software company can say, hey, I want to, check, with your team in 30 days or 60 or 90, whatever that milestone time you want that to look like, and create that feedback loop to say, okay, well, the onboarding was 70% on target. Fantastic. The uploading of data performance on our end was always 98%, at a good speed. Great. I think those are things that, you can have conversations to go back to the leadership company, of that company, and say, hey, these are the milestones we set at the beginning as a goal, and this is what, some of the milestones we hit or we missed. But what's the beauty about that is, maybe it may not be perfect, but what I see as the beauty is that relationship and trust that you're building with the client is so crucial, especially, with construction tech. It's not a vendor client relationship, it's a partnership, that both parties are kind of moving forward to really, as a whole, move this industry forward.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. So I want to circle back to the app invasion that you were talking about earlier.
I like that, app invasion.
How does taking a technology workflow approach, how is that different than the app-centric approach that we are maybe coming out of?
I feel so back in when I worked for a bond project, I remember I stumbled. I didn't really stumble. I was told to look into, learning about Bluebeam review. My BIM manager came in from a conference, and he gave me a CD back when vendors were giving CDs. This was like circa 2011, I believe. He came back from an IA conference, and he put the CD on my desk and said, hey, this sounded really interested in the conference. Can I have you do a deep dive on this and maybe see if we can implement it in our projects? And initially the person was like, oh, I opened it, I was like, oh, this is too many buttons, too colorful. I don't understand what's happening. But a couple of weeks later, I was looking at some documents and there was a mistake, and I didn't want to go back and go to the person like, can you correct this number? It's not accurate. And it was in a PDF, and I happened to Google, like, how can I edit a PDF, or how can I just, do something where it's easy. And so I learned that Review has this edit capability in there, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. And that sort of kind of kickstart, my journey into implementing, Studio into sort of our milestone design reviews. And because at the time we were having consultants, we were printing out eight sets contractually and put them in what we call the war room. And we would have the consultants, we would open up for sort of a window of time, about a week. And we would have them drive to the office in downtown LA, mark up 8 different times, and someone had to collect that data. So I saw that as an opportunity. I was like, oh, maybe we can, use Studio with this process.
Yeah.
So in that, in sort of, learning and discovering and trying to implement that within the project, all these apps started to come up, like PlanGrid was one of them. I think not OneNote, what's the other one that's a note taker? Will come to me in a second. And so I started seeing all of these great apps, and Bentley, they were talking about then the use of hypermodels and how we can get an iPad and load up the model and go to the field and kind of point the iPad at certain locations where you can kind of start to look what's behind the wall. And so we as a team, we were just excited about, wow, how can we connect this together? And that's when we learned, like, well, we can only use the studio within this bucket. And the great thing is, okay, we can save that PDF file in our DMS system. Okay, that's going to work. But what about what's on the iPad? How can we have it connect, back to sort of the entire process? And then as time went on and I moved away from the project, I started to see more of those apps, coming on board that were specific for one solution, like daily reporting or safety, or even issue checking. And I think for a while back in 2016, we talked a lot about how do we connect this together? And that's where the conversation started coming about the common data exchange. How do we make this data open? How do we make it connect? And I think that's been sort of, a thorn in the industry side at the moment. And then suddenly we start to look at, how web applications have really started to change that for us within the industry. We know that Autodesk Construct Cloud is really sort of leading the charge at the moment with connecting that solution all together, with having a fundamental component with docs, what they call docs, and then having all these different modules that you can kind of add. So it's almost like you're building that connection yourself. And again, that's my interpretation of that. How you can kind of build those building blocks of how you're working in your company or your project, to kind of help it, connect at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a different mentality though to think through the connecting data across workflows. How do you think that people should kind of reorient their thinking to be more holistic with data across workflows?
I'm going to quote my bid manager on this one. Begin with the end in mind. What do we want those final archive files to look like? What would be the acceptable document from the owner side that we say, okay, this is how we want these documents to sort of have a long life, and this is what we're accepting from our project team members, and we're final payment is pushed out. And I think beginning with the end in mind, like, what do we want that to look like? Do we want to have fragmented information? Do we want, are we going to depend on all of these apps to still be alive X number of years out? How do we want to extract that data moving forward? So I would say begin with the end in mind. And I think the end in mind is different for everybody. I think for us, when I was working with a bond project, the end for us was really having everything in this massive DMS system called ProjectWise. And this was, circa 2012 at the time. So that was the end for us, is making sure that everything was there in its original file format. And then we made sure that it was tagged and searchable for future recalls.
Yeah, I'm all about that. My team would be rolling their eyes when they hear this, because I say it all the time. What's the big win, and then let's work backwards from that and develop the plan there. I don't think you can really create a successful roadmap without knowing where you're going.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of just working backwards on. I think I've been made fun of that, like, oh, Lil's gonna say begin with the end in mind again. Yep, okay, fine. So, but I've probably used that phrase before, so it must be
nice. That's awesome. Well, if you could kind of wave your magic wand across the industry, how would you make them leverage the data better?
That's a really good question. I think it's just like maybe having flexible open data. I think that would be one. But I think we're always constantly concerned about our data being overwritten or altered or edited. And security it's another component within our industry that's growing as well. If you recall, back in let's say maybe 2013, when Target had a huge data breach, or if you recall, I read in an article that breach happened because it was through a mechanical. The mechanical system was vulnerable, and that was the hackers way in and sort of infiltrated everything.
wow.
And ever since then, I've seen an increase of, especially in this industry, of security and how can we reinforce this? What is that minimal, minimal security that we should be looking at? So I feel like that's something that it's not going away anytime soon, and especially with the GDPR rules that came out a couple of years ago. People are much more aware of sort of information that's being sold or not sold or shared, and I'm starting to see that more within AEC.
Yeah, so that brings up kind of the flip side of data. Is I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What do you think data responsibility really looks like for the industry?
I think it's just that. I think it's doing the due diligence and making sure you're vetting the right, technology within your industry, making sure you're not leaving vulnerabilities, like this company I mentioned, many years ago. I think it's also, I think we also need to think about, like, what data do we have? And I think we've also gone through this phase that I've heard, let's get everything and anything in the system. It's all data. Let's get it in. I think we need to be more responsible in the sense of, like, okay, what data do we really want? Do we need everything? Probably not. What's the most important thing we're going to need 5-10 years down the road? What's important for the project? So I think asking yourself the question of, like, well, what's important, what's not important, or what's this fluff of data? I was talking to a friend of mine who owns a artificial technology, and she talks a lot about how data can be used to kind of clean it up and organize it. Never really thought about that before, or never heard it in that perspective. And I think this is where maybe this could be a good merger between data and AI to help complement each other.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think that there's any kind of moral or ethical ramifications of collecting so much project data, not necessarily on the collecting the personal data of, like, with GDPR, and you have all their personal information, but just on the project data side of things?
I'd probably say probably not. I think I'm going to say no, but when I'll mention this Netflix documentary that we talked about. There's sort of this other dark side about personal data. And when I watched this documentary about data and how data sort of this, it was sort of referred to as is the next oil, it's like the oil of our future, right? We're extracting oil. So it got me thinking, I'm like, how does that affect, my industry? Does it affect? And I'm gonna say no, because we're not, it's not something that, we're not harvesting data, to sell to someone, right? Or here's some project info you might be interested. We noticed you were using, a Milwaukee drill tool. Now here's a DeWalt one. I don't think it's in that, sense. I know that when we talk about specific products, we tend to kind of see that product show up in our social media. I keep constantly telling it that I want $1 million, and I don't see that in my phone.
Let me know if that works. I'll keep trying it too.
I occasionally try to, like, I would like to find $1 million. But there's just things that pops in my social media. It's like, I was just thinking, or just having a conversation, or happen to search maybe a gift for someone, let's say camping stuff, and suddenly I have this slew of, like, from REI, like, you may be interested in this particular tent, you may be interested in this shit. It's like, no, right. I'm not. It's not even for me. So I'd say in that sense, the dark side of data on the personal side, it is kind of scary. I would probably say when it's in relation to the AEC, it's probably not. I think the data that we're after is really the ability to give us, that early on visibility to problems that we can't see, problems are going to cost us a lot of money. There's a colleague that lives in South America, and he once told me that a mistake of maybe a half an inch centimeter off of a footing cost them $50,000. And I couldn't believe that he missed the comment. In his eyes, like, oh, I don't know how I missed it. I had all the tech, all the parameters in the world, but it still cost me money at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So I think, so now this becomes data for him as part of a checklist, like, it's informing him what, to look at those footings next time, or to double check that work, and it's informing him to create a new process. So it's not going to cost him $50,000 down the road. It could save him that amount of money. So I think in our world, data is used for the good, and I think we're always wanting to, in generally have this, open consensus. Like, we want to share data, we want to be transparent, we want to, have it inform us, when our project is going to be delayed, or when is it on time, or are our payables on time, and so on. So I think it's for the good in our industry.
Yeah. So I haven't really thought this out, and it just popped into my head while you were talking. So this could be a very dangerous line here. But when you were talking about that, we're not collecting the data to say, hey, use this on a project, maybe you should use this on the next project. Made me think of digital twins and the potential that digital twins has, I think, for the good of being able to show where efficiencies might be gained on future projects by looking at past projects. Do you think that kind of data harvesting in that context, that the potential to kind of go down that path of, hey, you did use a Milwaukee tool on this, but maybe you should be using DeWalt on the next project?
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a potential there, or is that just kind of often in left field?
Yeah. So I will say this, speaking of digital twin, the way that I understand digital twin, if anyone hears this, please feel free to message me and give me some additional information. But I know for a while, I think it was like a year, 2 years ago, digital twin was like a heavy conversation. Some people were like, it's this, no, it's that.
Yeah.
The way I understand digital twins, and I'm going to try to explain this in the most simplistic form that I know, is, think of our bodies. It is in a digital replication of our body. And the way that I see it is, if I can have a digital version of myself where I can, go down the layers of my skin, muscle, and bones and organs, and if I'm not feeling well, like, I have, let's say, a headache, or maybe my eye is twitching, I would love to go into my digital self. I'm like, why is my eye twitching? Like, where is that? Kind of drill down to the pain point. I'm like, oh, maybe drink more water. That would solve the problem, right, with my headache. I see that as digital twin to be that in the building concept. And I think, where that data, I see that being really, leveraged in the right way is, maybe between 2 and 4, this side of the building or this particular rooms are always constantly hot. Why don't we just have sort of an automation to roll down the shades, maybe, pump, additional AC in that area. Or if there's a pipe where there's a leak, have that alert to facilities. Hey, there's a slow leak happening between, wall X and wall Y. Like, you may want to investigate that. Is that going to affect the floor above, the floor below? Like, that could be really great data to use on a building, especially for someone that's on the facility side that's managing that building. Say, okay, well, let me go investigate that. Let me open up that 3D version of my building, and let's see where I can have a good cut and look into that, to the inside of the wall, and see, is it really leaking, or is it missing, what is it missing? And that can really save someone sort of time and energy, and really prevent a huge hazard from happening. So to me, that's how I see the benefit of having a digital twin of your building that can be informative and tell you, hey, something's wrong, and here's where you can get this information and drill down to that level. And here is some additional data from the construction of your building that you're able to retrieve, like the air unit, what's the warranty on that? Who's the manufacturer? Did we do the maintenance? Has it been done? Okay, maybe we just need to change the filter, or maybe the coils need to be cleaned. So that's how I see digital twin really benefiting the data. Again, I'm not a digital twin expert, nor do I claim to be one. But after so many conversations and kind of being able to attend some sessions, I know Willow, I think his name is Ian, I believe. If you ever get a chance to hear sort of his presentation to this one, he is fantastic, really great presenter as well. But I love the way that he sort of dives into digital twins.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I think that the potential there is really fascinating to me around digital twin of not only on the operations side of things, but then informing construction of, hey, you are always putting it in this way, but really if you tweak it and, change it 10%, it creates more efficiencies and it would be better for the building. So this is a sales pitch then that you can give to owners of, hey, we do it this way because we found cost savings. I don't know. I think the potential there is pretty cool and fascinating. A lot of it goes over my head, but it's interesting.
That's why I gave this disclaimer of like, again, I'm not an expert, but it's definitely fascinating to learn more.
Yeah, nice. Well, what do you see as the end goal for construction in terms of the data collecting and exchange?
Oh, what is the end goal? I think I'm going to say I don't know, because I feel like the beauty about this industry in technology is ever evolving. It's always changing. I think as long as, we are resilient and adaptable, which we know we are as a world, especially after being hit with a pandemic, last year and still ongoing. I think as long as we have sort of this thought of like always stay curious, always look into things. I think last year there was a shortage on 360 cameras. I think before COVID hit, and I said this a couple of times, I think no one imagined that that type of tech, 360 cameras and robotics were going to be something that were going to fly off the shelf all of a sudden, because there was a huge urgency to keep everyone safe on a job site at a great distance. But I think, I think if we always stay curious and always open to what's out there, I really can't say like, oh, this is the end solution. We're constantly evolving. As an industry, I think the way we build buildings hasn't really changed much, right? We're still using, specific materials. Although it is exciting when I read about 3D printing of concrete, or I think I also read an article a few months back of someone building, homes in a third world country out of plastic bottles and just recycling that and molding them a little bit different to build the walls. Like that to me is exciting way of like changing the way we build things. I think as the construction side, I think as long as we always stay curious and always open to change, I think we're gonna, it's, this industry has, so much to grow and so much to change in the future.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you what the end result is, but I really don't know.
Well, I love the stay curious option. I think construction is really good at figuring out how to solve a problem. So it's just coming up and getting consensus on what that problem is. And then construction, that's what they do best is go and solve things.
Yeah, build and solve and learn, right? Oh, now, even in our own DIY project, it's like, oh, well, next time I'll make sure to put an anchor on the wall versus just going willy-nilly and just putting a nail. But that's just my own DIY project because I'm impatient.
Adapt and learn. Adapt and learn.
Let's do it right. Just measure right. Oh my God, I'm just so impatient. But yes.
That's awesome. Well, how do people get a hold of you or find out more information?
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, full name Lilian Magallanes. You also find my contact information. So full name lilianmagallanes@gmail.com. So if you want to connect and, let's be industry friends. I'm always happy to connect, always happy to help anyone. So it's given me so much and happy to give forward.
That's awesome. Well, last question. What does innovation mean to you?
Oh, I think I'm going to go back to what I said, always being curious. I think always thinking outside the box, always looking at problems from a different from a different angle. I think when I think of innovation, I think about so many things with innovation that's currently changed today, like the way that we travel. Some of us choose in someone's home, which is, if you think about it and you say it out loud, oh, I'm renting someone's home for a weekend, sounds really weird. I'm definitely an introvert. I'm like, that would be really weird. However, having an app like Airbnb where I'm like, oh, I can look at your home, book it, sounds good, have a good communication, how to get there. I think that to me is innovation. Like we're changing, how we travel, and even the way that we, get to destination A and B, like taxis. Like, that was for me as a kid. I felt like taxis is such a luxury thing to take. Like hail a taxi, get in. It's like, oh my God, like I grew up in LA most of my life. We don't really take taxis in LA. There's always a different means of transportation.
Yeah.
But now you can just open your phone and call an Uber or Lyft, and the car, again, you're getting into a stranger's car. It's going to promise to take you to your next destination. So I mean, to me, innovation is looking at things differently, or looking at things that are in front of my face, like transportation and lodging, and just having a different way to look at it or to use it. So that's how I see innovation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a big believer in getting different perspectives on things. I think it definitely fills out the blind spots that we all have without even knowing it.
Agreed.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining the show. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.